Hey class, Prof JC here, and I just want to talk briefly about this issue of ethics, and I want us to have a chance to kind of define it this week. In this book here, and I don't believe that this was on your mandatory reading list. If you ever want to get it, it's great. If ethics is something important to you, I'd recommend this book, Peter Singer, Practical Ethics. And he starts off the book, last week we read out of the book Being God, right? If you remember that, and I think I asked everyone if you would look at, let's see, it was the introduction and then the 7 threats to ethics, right? So when we think about what ethics is, and that's what we're going to talk about this week, and I want you to do a little thinking about that. Peter Singer really just talks about what ethics is not. He starts off the chapter by talking about what ethics is not, right? And then he spends time defining it. But what's interesting is he doesn't ever really define what ethics is. It's just kind of a lot of, and that's the confusing thing about ethics, right? Is a lot of people don't really know what they are, okay? It's really a relative kind of subject, right? It depends on, right, ethics. When we talk about living an ethical life, that's going to depend on each of us differently. Some of us live in an ethical life is going to look one way, and some of us is going to look another way, and it could depend on culture and where you're from and all that stuff. But that's hard for a lot of people to kind of digest, because we want to know, we want to say, well, this is what ethics is. I know what ethics is, and this is what it is. And the reality is we don't, it's such a personal thing, okay? So here's what he says. He talks about what ethics is not, and he says ethics is not primarily about sex. And then he goes on and he talks about how back in the day, we'd hear about the religious leaders and the political leaders who got caught up in things, and we'd hear about the decline of moral standards. But he talks about that's not really, when we look at that issue, that's not really he says this here: fortunately, this era has passed. We no longer think that morality or ethics is a set of prohibitions particularly concerned with sex. Even religious leaders talk more about global poverty and climate change and less about promiscuity and pornography. That it used to be. I grew up in a church, and probably many of you did as well. That's why you chose Point Loma Nazarene University, Faith-Based University. Less so in our graduate programs than our undergraduate programs. But maybe you grew up with, going to church. And what was the thing they talked a lot about in church in the 80s and 90s, right? It was sex, right? That's the thing that came up. I'm not trying to be inappropriate here, but that's what they talked about. And then I grew up, on top of that, I went to a Christian school. So can you imagine growing up for the first 10 years of my life, grades 1 through 10, I took a break in one of those years, 7th grade, and then I went to a public school and had too much fun, and my parents immediately sent me back to the Christian school. And then finally in 10th grade, I had enough. And so 11th and 12th, I was able to go to public school, and that's where I began to thrive. But what did they talk about in private school as well, right? We had chapel 3 times a week, and every speaker that came in, don't do drugs, don't have sex. Those are the biggest things that they talked about. And what did a lot of the students end up doing? Well, you can go figure that out. But thankfully, it's moved on from that, right? Now it's much bigger. Even religious leaders, when they talk, they talk about bigger issues, not just sex, right? It's now, how do we, as Christians, as people of faith, how do we approach the world, and what are the things that we can do, not just avoid doing, right? And then he goes on to say, Peter Singer says, ethics is not good in theory, but not in practice. Right? So some people talk about that. Well, ethics it's a good theory. It's good to talk about, but we don't really need to practice it. But the reality is, especially as the world has changed, right? We're living in a time where there is a respect for ethics. We live in a time where there's cancel culture, where people who are being found out to be, two-faced. So you're one way here and you're another way here. Because we live in a world where you can just pick up a phone and start recording. People record these things, and now they're putting them out there for other people to say, well, we're not allowed to be two-faced anymore. So it's not just a thing we can talk about. It's something that we're asking, especially people in leadership, positions, we're asking them to live it out in practice. It's no longer, some of you might disagree on this, but according to the book here, ethics is not based on religion, okay? It's not something that again, it goes back to what we talked about before. Some of us grew up and we thought, we're ethical people because we go to church and we follow the rules that the church says. And then what we start finding out over many years, and we continue to see this happen. This year has been a big year. If any of you are evangelicals, or you've watched out there how many pastors have really struggled this year, not even struggled, that have just been fired for horrible things, weird things, strange things. As we've grown and evolved as human beings, we realize, wait a minute, we can't base ethics on that either, because in religion, right? In religion, we find a lot of flaws in terms of, the flaws in Christianity, the flaws in Judaism, flaws in Islam. Every religion has certain flaws, right? And so to base it on that is something that we can't do as well, right? I'm just trying to think here. And then he goes on to say, either not all religious thinkers. Okay, so he says this: traditionally, the more important link between religion and ethics was that religion was thought to provide a reason for doing what is right. The reason being that those who are virtuous will be rewarded by an eternity of bliss, while the rest of us roast in hell. Okay, not all religious thinkers have accepted this. Immanuel Kant, a most pious Christian, scorned anything that smacked of self-interested motive for obeying the moral law. So what people are starting to say, people starting to argue, is I don't want to follow some kind of religion if I have to follow it just because at the end of it, there's some hell out there that I'm going to go to if I don't follow it. Okay, more people are starting to say this, right? That we don't want ethics to be about that. We don't want morality to be about that. It's got to be about something bigger than just avoiding hell, right? Avoiding the fiery pit of hell. Ethics is not merely a matter of subjective taste or opinion. Okay, and I've underlined a lot here. I just want to make sure I read the right things. I'm going to kind of leave that one there. If you have the book, you can kind of read through that a little bit. This issue of the role that reason can play in ethics is the crucial point raised by the claim that ethics is subjective. To put practical ethics on a sound basis, it has to be shown that ethical reasoning is plausible. The denial of objective ethical facts does not imply the rejection of ethical reasoning. Here, the temptation is to say simply that the proof of the pudding lies in the eating, and that the proof that reasoning is possible in ethics is to be found in the remaining chapters of the book. So anyway, he's going to talk about that later. Basically, he's trying to prove his point there. It's not just a subjective taste or an opinion. Now, Peter Singer would say that because obviously he's given his life to ethics. But I'm going to leave that up to you, okay? But when it comes to practical and applied ethics, and that's what this class is about, okay, this is what I want us to discuss today. He goes on and he talks about what is ethics, right? Or what ethics is in one view, but then he takes several paragraphs to talk about it, and I can't find a one view in any of this. So here's what I wanted us to do today. I just want you to list off what I just read. Again, if you don't have the book, you're going to have to go back and make sure you listen to this. According to Peter Singer, what ethics is not, and I just listed them off for you. Okay, so just list those reasons, or not reasons, but list those concepts, what ethics is not. And then what I'd like for you to do is just say, do you agree or disagree? And just in a sentence or two, say why or why not, okay? And then in the third one, here's what I want you to do, okay? And you can use ChatGPT, right, for this third one if you want to. You can be creative with it. You can look this up, okay? My preference is that you would stick close to Aristotle, because we're going to talk about that here in the coming weeks, Aristotle's view of ethics. But I want you to come up with your view of what ethics is. What is your definition? If I were you, I would research Aristotle and ethics. And one of the books that we're going to look at is Nicomachean. I'm always saying this word wrong, so I need to make sure I get it fixed before I actually do a video about it. But the book is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, okay? And he has a certain view of what ethics is and happiness and how it all kinds of works together. I want you to just define, okay, what you believe ethics to be. and what the foundation of that is. Is it legal? Is it not? Right? You get to decide that. And then from the weeks that we're going forward, I want you to keep that definition, okay? Because your definition of ethics, every other week, I'm gonna throw out a case study for you, okay? It's gonna be a simple case study, and you're gonna define what is ethical in that case study, okay? So that's gonna be a lot of fun for us to do over the next several weeks, but I want you to have a definition that you're working with, okay? So I've listed out the questions. Feel free to feel free to answer those questions. Please answer those questions. Come up with your definition of ethics, and then we're going to use that. That's going to be how you're going to frame everything you talk about over the next week. So please take this seriously. Please define this well. And then my hope is that you'll even use this out there in the marketplace, in industry. Hey, thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next podcast. Take care.